bold journalism,
But Drew Hernandez is a strong-minded individual.
exposing lawlessness,
Drew Hernandez, who is ideological,
finding the truth,
and use the word Antifa.
This is what they do.
battling
They're
mainstream
liars. The woke mob, all they can do is lie.
These are the front lines.
What's going on, Thought Criminals? Welcome to Frontlines. I am your host, Drew Hernandez. Today, we have a very special guest, Taylor Silverman, pro skateboarder and advocate for women's rights in sports. Taylor has been skating professionally for years, but in the last couple of years, she's lost money and titles due to men who claim they're women competing in her sport. She's here today to tell her story and talk about why she's so passionate about saving women's sports. But before we get into that, it's just that time to remind you that America Fest is right around the corner. If you haven't bought your tickets yet, what are you doing? Come see dozens of Patriots speaking on stage. I will be filming episodes of Frontlines live on Media Row. It's going to be incredible. Use the QR code on your screen right now. Taylor Silverman, I am so excited to have you on my show. Met you first when I had an appearance on Timcast. You were there in the studio, and it wasn't when I first saw you before I went on the show, like in the kitchen at the house at the Tim Castle. It was when you were skating.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I was there right before the episode, and I'm down there.
Because that was the first time I ever went there.
That was the first time I ever met you.
Yeah.
And I see this girl just like destroying it in the kind of like mini half pipe, I guess we can call it that.
That's my favorite part of the castle.
Of the castle. And I'm just like, dude, this girl's like killing it. And you know, I was like kind of intimidated, and I'm like, who is that? And then like the guys came like, dude, that's Taylor. That's Taylor Silverman, like the girl that like got canceled because she's, you know, calling out, you know, the mentally ill men that are trying to destroy females in their own sports. And I'm like, oh, and that's when I got to talk to you and hear your story.
Yeah.
So it's cool that you're here.
I think the first time we actually talked was on like the members only after show, and that was my first time ever out there. I wasn't even very familiar with the show, but after I posted what I did, spoke up about my experience, I met a lot of new people.
Yeah, of course. You were all over. You were on Fox. Obviously, Timcast, you made an appearance. Your face was everywhere. Your story was everywhere. For people that are my audience that don't know you or your story, can you just give us like a brief description of what you do, what happened to you, and how we ended up here today?
So I have been skateboarding for 11 years, almost 12 years now. And for the past several years, I've competed in skateboarding whenever something comes around. And over the past few, I had done some traveling to do so. So in 2018 and in 2020, I experienced this at a smaller level. But in winter of last year, I had traveled to a Red Bull finals, Red Bull Cornerstone, after qualifying in my home state at the time, Michigan, to compete in this contest where there's thousands of dollars on the line. And the day of the finals, I found out that there would be a male who identified as female skating in that division. And at the time, I didn't know what to do, if I should say something, if I should just get through the contest. And I ended up placing second and speaking up about it afterwards by reaching out to Red Bull privately through email, of which we'd corresponded before. But they ignored me, which I didn't expect them to actually ignore me. So I went ahead and shared my story on the only social media I had at the time, which was Instagram, and it blew up more than I ever expected it to. But the reason I did it is because I had seen this becoming an issue, not just in skateboarding, but in other sports. And I'd seen a few women speak up about it, which inspired me to use my voice, because I felt like people who'd experienced it needed to share their stories so people knew what could happen if we allow this. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of using my voice.
Well, it's the only way to
now.
really push back on what these people are doing.
Yeah.
Because if you just sit back and you remain silent, they're just going to continue to just snowball and destroy women. And we're going to get into that as well. I want to get your takes as to how you see things going. But what was the backlash? What did you receive on, offline, even behind the scenes from Red Bull and maybe skaters behind the scenes that you thought were your friends? Did you receive a lot of hate? Did you receive a lot of love in return? What was your experience, the aftermath that came from speaking up as a independent, successful woman?
So the immediate aftermath, I'm talking right after I posted this, was really bad. I started getting really negative comments, people calling me all sorts of names, people accusing me of being transphobic. People immediately started posting anti-Semitic things. And I basically talked to a few people who had been really supportive of me, having spoken to them about it before I ever went public about it. And they told me, stand your ground. Like, you're going to be supported. And I left my phone and I went to the beach. And by the time I came home, like an hour, 2 hours later, it had completely switched and it was a bunch of support coming in. I saw the tweet that Colin Wright had made because his girlfriend, who's a really amazing journalist, Christina Buttons, had saw the story and she basically broke it. He shared it online, and that's when Tim saw it. And Tim made the post about, Tim Cass will gladly pay Taylor Silverman the difference that Red Bull didn't pay her for first place. So very quickly, I had a lot of support coming in just from those
Good,
few
praise
posts.
God.
Yeah, and I think about it sometimes that I could have slipped through the cracks and nobody saw it or none of the right people saw it, but somehow the exact right people saw it that it actually became a positive thing. So I'm really grateful for that. But there's definitely still a lot of negativity. I get hate messages every day. People tweet crazy stuff at me, but I've never had anything happen in person. Every time that someone has seen me in person and they're aware of the story, like it doesn't happen that often, but like at the skate park, for example, skaters will come up to me and tell me, oh, I've been following you for this many months. I heard this on whatever show. And it's always very supportive. So all of the hate I've received is online.
Have you been to like a protest yet?
I've had protesters.
Like an they're basically like anti-female. All these people that are like pro-trans, pro-this. It's this interesting dynamic where the pro-trans people are clashing with like the feminists or just people that like support women, right?
Yeah.
So have you been around anything like that at all?
I had one experience like that. And actually online, my experience, even with people in the LGBT community, has been mostly positive. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, I'm part of this community, or I am trans, or know somebody who's trans, and we support you, and we understand that you're speaking up about fairness, and it's not supposed to be a personal attack or anything against somebody for the way that they're living their life. But my only experience with protesters was the 50th anniversary of Title IX, Independent Women's Forum, and a bunch of other groups all got together and had the Our Bodies, Our Sports rally in DC.
Yes.
And
I think we did cover that.
Yeah, that was my first time actually being with a really large group of women, not just women, like men were there too, who had gone through an experience similar to mine, or who were involved in the politics of it and maintaining Title IX to keep that fairness for girls in school sports. And even coaches, lots of different people were there to speak and to use their voice to raise awareness about this. And we had protesters. But I made myself available to the protesters, and they didn't have anything to chant. They didn't have anything to say. They basically banged on drums and whistles. And I wondered if they were even in on this issue or if they just saw something online to show up. Because I went out there and nobody said anything to me.
They never have anything to say. They're not intellectual.
Yeah,
It's just mob mentality.
I had one of the journalists, you know how there'll be leftist journalists who go to CPAC just to torture themselves for a weekend and bother people. I had one of them ask me some questions and just, well, don't you think that this is bullying people or hurting people? And I just respond, unfortunately, you're setting aside the women's feelings and putting one person's ahead of everybody else's. So, like, all the arguments that they make are pretty easy to dismantle. And then, as for, like, the one question I get sometimes from people like that is, well, don't you think it's misogynistic or sexist to suggest that women are less than or can't compete as well as men? And I say, no, we have biological differences.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have the separated spaces, so we can celebrate the women who excel in this equal playing field.
Yeah, it's why the WNBA exists.
Yeah,
it's
and
why the Olympics have been separated by genders and sexes.
yeah, and if we didn't have spaces like this, there would be all these amazing female athletes you didn't even know their name. And sure, there are still women who are absolute prodigies who excel and can even compete with men.
Yeah.
Like there's, for example, in some areas, in some countries, and even not that long ago in America, I go to a contest sometimes, and there wouldn't be a women's division. Or there were even times that I went and they said, you're too good for the women's division because it's all beginners, so we're going to have you compete in men's. And in Israel, for example, there's one girl who's really good, and she competes with the guys, and she places with the guys, and she's celebrated even more for it because she's excelling despite being at the disadvantage. So it's just crazy to me that people can't recognize the basics of biology and that
And you're talking about
women are not
skateboarding,
men.
right?
Yeah, skateboarding.
Israeli skateboarders. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this. So in beyond skateboarding, I want to talk about skateboarding when we come
Yeah.
back from the break. But beyond skateboarding, just sports in general, right?
Yes.
Because, like you said, there are physical advantages that men have in certain sports,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you take a look at football, if you take a look at basketball, it's just obvious. How do you see this affecting women? Maybe young girls at a young age that aspire to be an athlete in the future that are now having to think about what if some dude comes along and has an obvious physical advantage over me and just I can't do anything. Like what do you see coming in the future that's going to be a huge problem for females?
So this is impacting a lot of sports. I was aware of a few when I first spoke up, and I was aware that it impacted even contact and combat sports, which raises a whole nother issue about safety, not just fairness. Even non-contact sports, like the incident where the volleyball player got the ball spiked in the face, this can be a safety issue as well. But I've now heard cases, I'm probably going to miss some because there's such a long list, but there's skateboarding, obviously, there's surfing, there's cycling, there's track and field, there's weightlifting, there's MMA, there's
Joe Rogan
volleyball.
talks about that all the time, which is like
Yeah.
insanity.
Yeah, there's rugby. That was a big one. Disc golf is a big one. These sports that are more independently organized or, ran by sponsors rather than like school sports seem to be impacted worse because you kind of have to rely on sponsors to make these decisions. There's not always like protections like Title IX, which now are the Biden administration is trying to take away, but will at least change so it can be used in a different way that girls will lose the protection. But I think we're already seeing the consequences of this. I have had so many parents and athletes reach out to me that they don't want to participate in competition if they know it's unfair. They don't want to be part of something that they see as a mockery of what they do. And they don't want to be mean. They understand, like I do, that the athletes who do this, I think some may not have good intention. Some may be actually encouraged by a lot of people to do this. And I'm sure it's a difficult position to be in. But when you look at the reality of it, when you look at the facts and you consider the fairness and what girls have to lose here, it's an easy thing to understand that there's a better solution. But girls, I think, especially girls who didn't grow up with the privilege of experiencing Title IX in school. Like, I played sports before I skateboarded. The only reason I started skateboarding was because when I was like 15 or 16, I made the decision with my family that I was going to switch to homeschool. And I was able to actually graduate early because of that. It was a really positive thing for me, not for everybody, but good for me. But that meant I wasn't going to be able to be on the softball team anymore. So I needed something to stay busy. But when I played softball, I never had to even think about that being an issue with going to tryouts or being on a team and dealing with the like psychological aspect of it, especially for kids to go through. It's got to be confusing. But girls now, they're not going to know what it's like to have that equal opportunity. This is going to be the normal, to feel like their opinion doesn't matter, like they don't matter as much as somebody else. And
that's what's damaging.
Yeah.
That is what is going to be damaging to an entire generation moving
Yes.
forward. I call you a pro skater. I just, I've watched you. I'm like, dude, she's really good. Let's talk about, I mean, obviously this is going to have a huge negative impact on young girls going into the future. But I also wanted to talk about like skateboard culture, because like growing up in SoCal, I mean, I didn't grow up in the 80s where skateboard culture was like, you know, really blowing up and all that with the 70s and all that. But for me, it was like getting a skateboard was like my first car. Getting my first bike was like getting my first car. Like you can get to point A very far to point B very fast. How is it now? Because I mean, there was always this like rebel culture where like it was like the punk rock scene fused with the skateboard culture, where like we're rebelling against the government, we're rebelling against the establishment. Is that where we're still at in the skateboard culture today, or is it getting woke? What's happening?
I think that, and I actually like this about skateboarding, it's very diverse. There are people from all different walks of life who become interested in skateboarding, which I think is a good thing. Like, when I started skateboarding, I wasn't your typical skater at the park in the area of which I was doing it. And that can be kind of challenging, like being a young girl at a skate park when there's nobody who looks like you there. But I still felt pretty welcome for the majority of my time, like in those first few years. And there's been a lot more girls starting to skate too. I think that's been a good change. I think that skateboarding is it's something that anybody can do. It doesn't matter if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're male, if you're female. There are people who are disabled who skate. Like, I know multiple people who are blind who skateboard. And I think that's really cool about skateboarding. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You don't have to be like skating a vert ramp, or you don't have to be going to street spots every day. You don't have to be someone who just does freestyle. There are skateboarders now who combined all these different aspects of it, and I really like that direction that it's taking. But yeah, it's something that draws a lot of people to love it. And I think that everybody should skateboard if they feel drawn to. And I think that skateboarding, being as diverse as it is actually one of the few sports that if we were to potentially create like another category or space in the area of competition, it'd probably work and be supported.
And you can just like intentionally go compete in that space.
Yeah,
instead of
perhaps.
destroying a female's career like yours, that could potentially happen, or someone coming up in the future.
I don't feel like it's been destroyed, but it can.
What I'm saying is, like,
it can have detrimental.
It could have an impact. Like, you got second place when you should have got first.
Yeah, and
in an instance like that, I'm not saying your career's destroyed. I'm just saying these biological men are causing some huge problems for female athletes.
Yeah, but a lot of people are, nodding along to it, or they feel like they have to say they agree with it because there is such this strong sense that you'll be accused of being hateful. But I think people need to hear each other out, that it's not about excluding anyone. I think everyone should skateboard. I think everyone should have the opportunity to compete in skateboarding if they want to. And whether that is by doing so in competing in the category of the sex of which you biologically are, or creating another space, or having a conversation to at least come up with some other ideas, I think it's possible. But what we're doing right now, I don't think is working. It's not fair to the girls. It makes girls feel like they can't succeed, and a lot of girls won't want to compete.
Other female skaters and competitors, when they saw what happened to you, how did they react to that? Like, what are some of the conversations that are taking place? Like, do they agree with what was done to you? Do they agree how you responded to it? Do they agree that there should be like a separate category for if you identify as whatever the hell you want, just go compete over there. Let us keep our, traditional, original competitive spaces. Like, what are some of those conversations from other female competitors?
Every opinion, which is kind of crazy to me that most the men who I know who skate, they all agree with me and they're very supportive. But with the women, it seems to be kind of split. And it's almost like cult-like behavior in the sense that you can show somebody clear evidence that the thing that they're supporting directly negatively impacts them, but they'll still go along with it. But I don't know if they genuinely don't understand how severe of consequences it will have. I think some people just want to stand up for their friends, which I respect that. I think that I hope people understand that for me, this isn't meant to be a personal attack on anybody. I actually think that it's the contest organizers and sponsors who need to take responsibility here to create better guidelines and rules to go by, because it puts everyone in an uncomfortable position. And I wish that I didn't have to be the one talking about it. I wish that Red Bull, for example, or the Border or other contest organizers who have allowed this to happen would step up and have a meeting and hear people out like myself so that they could create better rules to go by to include everyone but also maintain fairness. Because we haven't even had women's divisions that long in skateboarding, and it's sad to see them become this way where female athletes lose opportunities so quickly.
Exactly. And that's, I think the point I was trying to make is like, that's where this goes.
Yeah.
Where female athletes and competitors, they lose opportunities when they should have had opportunities, not because you're a female, not because of some diverse argument, not because, oh, we want to be inclusive, but the words I keep hearing come from you are fairness, right? It all comes down to the competitive nature of who's the best out there, right? And like you said, I mean, if you have a biological male going up against a biological female in some cases, there will be an advantage. I mean, even like if you take the argument to like baseball, like they have such a huge issue with like steroid use. Why? Because it gives a male a biological advantage over the others that don't. So they view that as bad, but for some reason, it's not the same when it comes to sex and gender.
Yeah. And
The confusion is insane. We got about a minute left. We're going to continue this conversation, you guys, on Rumble. So right now, if you guys want to go subscribe to our Rumble channel right now, we're going to continue this extended conversation with the great Taylor Silverman. So make sure to use the QR code on your screen right now. We're going to continue this conversation. You can go watch it on Rumble right now. Where can people follow you and just continue to support you and follow your story?
I just have social media, Instagram, Taylor May Silverman, and Twitter, TM Silverman. And if you search my name, you can find different interviews and appearances I've done.
And like we were just talking about, right, it all comes down to fairness, because as a competitor, there's the option of losing. There's the option of winning, and it has to be fair, right? But right now, the left, their like way of thinking and their definition of what's fair is just simply being inclusive, and it doesn't matter like who you are. But from a sports perspective, it does. It absolutely does. But this is why for the past few years you're getting participation trophies, and we don't, there's no such thing as first, there's no such thing as last. It's just do your best and you're fine. I mean, that's where the culture is, but you can't have that mindset when you're competing.
Yeah,
and it's damaging everybody.
I think people who are athletes or have been athletes understand this one pretty easily, because they know what it's like to train. They know what it's like to be whatever sport you're in, whether you're at like the skate park all the time practicing, or you're in the gym practicing and you're at practice, or working with, whoever, to be the best that you can be. For women, if we feel like that's all for nothing and we can't be celebrated for the hard work that we've put in, and it's not just about winning all the time. Part of being an athlete is losing well too. That's part of it. There's been contests that I have placed in the top rankings in, there have been contests that I have been dead last. And I've had a good time at all of them. They've been a good experience. And it's okay to lose and be a good sport about it. But when it's not fair, that's where it's not really an issue about being a good sport anymore. It's about speaking up to maintain the integrity of the competition. But yeah, this is much bigger than skateboarding.
And before, we were just talking before the break about how, I mean, even for young girls, like you develop life skills. You develop, things when you do lose, and you learn from that mistake, and it teaches you life lessons. Speak on that as well.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of tangible things that are at risk of being lost here. People can lose scholarships. Girls. This affects female athletes specifically. Female athletes can lose scholarships, they can lose titles, they can lose the opportunity to go to states. I know girls who had that happen to them in high school. In the case of competing at a level where you're making money or you're doing it professionally, it can impact your career and impact you financially. But for girls playing sports in school, in middle school and high school, that is a time, in my experience and in the experience of so many women I've talked to, where sports teach you life skills that you will use your entire life. You will learn to work on a team. You learn to take a win in a good way. Like you will learn good sportsmanship, whether it's winning or losing. You will build your confidence. And if girls don't want to participate in sports, they're going to lose those spaces where they feel empowered and where they learn skills that are going to help them for their whole life to be successful. And
off of genuine merit, not like something given to you where like,
Yeah.
oh, hey, we just made it easy for all of these women to feel good about themselves. It was all rigged. It was all an easy, no, like genuine blood, sweat, tears based off of their own merit, their own physical abilities and capabilities. Even that's being taken away.
Yeah, like in my experience, when I would try out for a team in school, that was a stressful time. It was really exciting. I wondered if I was going to make it. I knew that if I didn't, it would be okay. Life would go on. But when you find out you made the team, that's something you're proud of. And that is a very important life experience, I think, for kids to have growing up. And to assure them that they can accomplish anything that they want to. If they put in the work, you can be on this team. You can win this title. You can make this record for your school. And there are far too many cases where girls are feeling like, well, I can't win. I can't make the title. Like, I'm not going to go to states. Like, for example, the Connecticut runners, Selena Soul, Alana Smith, and Chelsea Mitchell, they all ran against 2 transgender athletes for all 4 years of high school. And the interviews with them and their parents are heartbreaking because they talk about how the girls would go to these races knowing that they could not win.
Jeez.
And that had to be so disheartening.
How do you even have a conversation with someone like that? Like it just seems like this common thread that the left is pushing constantly. Everything's rigged. The elections are rigged. They never want to compete in a fair, competitive space. They just want everything to be in their favor. And I think that's just devastating. Like, I hear that, and it's just sad. I'm sorry if I cut you off, but it pisses me off to hear stuff like that.
It was very sad for me to see those because, like, when I first spoke up, it took me seeing other girls speak up for me to speak up because I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know how bad the backlash would be. I know that people would not be happy about it, but I didn't think it'd be to this degree. I didn't think that this many people would know my story now. But it's important for the girls to tell their stories and for me to tell my story because I had to see Riley Gaines on the news talking about what happened to her. I had to see the Connecticut runners speak up. And I actually also I did some research of my own, and I wanted to know the other side of this. Like, what is the mindset of someone who thinks that this is the right way to go about this? And I listened to some of those videos, and I was not particularly convinced. But then I actually came across videos from YouTubers like Blair White and like Sarah Higdon, who are trans women who speak up about some like woke issues and share their thoughts. And they were making videos advocating for female athletes. And I thought, well, this is clearly something other people are going through that is progressively becoming a bigger issue. And there are even people in this community who advocate for us. So seeing that, I felt like it was going to be okay. I needed to speak up. And I'm glad I did. But people should know that this is actually like a nonpartisan issue. This is an issue that people with all different views, who come from all different walks of life, people who identify in different political parties even, can understand and agree on. And like, for example, I did Tulsi Gabbard's show recently, and it just came out like today. I was listening to it this morning because I'd like forgotten about it. We recorded it weeks ago. But we talked about how Our Bodies, Our Sports rally that I mentioned earlier, that all the girls came together, and doctors and attorneys, different athletes, parents, coaches. For me, that was my first time seeing everybody in a room together, and it gave me a lot of hope that this is going to get resolved. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Absolutely. I think part of what the media is good at doing, these masters of propaganda, is they give a microphone to a minority of people that are even probably within a minority, right? Because this whole trans thing is like such a small, tiny fraction of the American public.
Right.
The majority of this country agrees with everything you just said, agrees with stuff that I say, like, dude, let the females have their sports and be successful, because this comes down to that is like that has always been the core of American sports, is fairness, is being competitive and competing at that level. Cheating has always been looked down upon in American sports. And that is American history.
You're right that the population of people who are transgender is very small. The amount of people who are athletes who want to compete in, females divisions, if they're biological males, is even smaller. But another important thing to remember is this is not a 1-to-1 ratio for who's affected. For every athlete who does this, every trans athlete who does this, a lot of women and girls are affected.
Yes.
Like whether it is being displaced in competition, potentially not making a team, losing out on a scholarship. These are big things. And then, like I said earlier, like young girls missing out on the opportunity to have that space to be empowered and learn life skills
And
that
just
you learn in
discouraging them
sports.
to even try.
Yeah, it's something that I had no idea was as big of an issue as it was. I knew it was becoming a problem, but I've heard so many stories now, and we're only going to hear more unless we do something to resolve it. And I don't think that the solution is to say, well, there's any group that should not play sports. I think that the solution will either be that people compete in the division of which their biological sex aligns with, and people be like welcoming to that. If like men's teams were welcoming to that, perhaps things could be different.
If there was like a separate division where it's like, this is for trans
I think that's
competing,
also a possibility.
I'm going to be honest. I think that would actually be kind of entertaining
I think
to watch.
especially in skateboarding.
I don't know. I think that might be kind of entertaining to watch, but that's,
well, in
people
skateboarding,
might not agree
there
with that,
are a
but-
lot of trans skaters. So that could actually work. And I bet sponsors would support that. I bet people would watch it.
Yeah.
But the only way we can find out is if we talk about it, if we try something.
But if, like you said, the word you used earlier was cult-like thinking, cult-like behavior, because
That's
you
what
can't
I've witnessed.
you can't question it, you can't talk about it. Everyone in the room knows like what's going on, but they're just too afraid to say anything. I think that's the perfect way to put it, but that becomes like spiritual, right? And I think that's where we are. And when I first met you, I wanted to talk about this as well, as you were talking about your faith in God. You were talking about as a woman, kind of like growing up, discovering you want a family, you want children, and I don't know if that's too personal, but you were telling me, I'm like, dude, that's awesome to hear.
That conversation on that show.
I think the audience would love to hear that stuff from you.
Well, okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on this because when I first spoke up, I was kind of shocked actually that so many people perceived me, and in a negative way, as being like really religious. And I was shocked at how many comments and messages I got just talking about you hateful religious people. And I was saying, I'm not even particularly religious. Like, I believe in God. That's incredibly important to me. But like, I don't like attend, any sort of services regularly. I'm not, perfectly celebrating every holiday. Like, the religious people I know don't drive on Saturday, so I don't consider myself to be that religious.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily feel like they're religious or involved in a religious group, but who value God, who value spirituality, whatever way they may view it. And perhaps it is easier for people to recognize why this is problematic if they have any sort of relationship with God or spirituality. But what I've learned from this is a lot of people really hate religious people and make all sorts of false assumptions about religious people. And having people attack me for being religious when I don't even feel like I say religious stuff. Like, yeah, I'll talk about God, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that, whether you agree with it or you don't. Like, if somebody talked to me and told me, well, I'm an atheist or I'm agnostic or I'm another religion, I'd say, oh, interesting. Let me hear your perspective. Like, these are conversations we should have. But the way that I've seen people respond is if, like, being religious is this evil, horrible thing. And then they almost have created, like, a religion of their own, but don't recognize it to be like that.
The cult.
It is kind of cult-like. And in the sense that if you think for yourself and disagree with anything, you're out. You can't be involved anymore. You're a bad person. You thought wrong. But in even religious spaces, I've seen people have conversations where they disagree on things, but they all still consider themselves to be, like, in the same community. But yeah, it's pretty crazy how quickly. And another thing, sorry to be a little all over the place.
You're good.
But it is almost assumed by everyone with these beliefs that by default everyone is in the cult. And I think that is why so many people remain quiet, because they think, well, if I'm silent, they can't accuse me of not being a part of this, even if I'm thinking for myself and I'm, I have my own values. But the silence has kind of become complicity here, because everyone does just assume you agree with it. And it didn't sit well with me knowing that people thought that I was okay with what had happened to me because I didn't speak up right away. That's why I had to say something. I knew that if I acted like I was okay with it, that it made it seem more okay to everybody else who did question it.
Because you got to remain true to yourself.
Yeah.
And there's truth that that is at stake on the table. And speaking up for women right now is essential. It's always essential, but right now more than ever, because there is a crystal clear attack on everybody. There's an attack on the nuclear family. There's an attack on males. There's an attack on females. There's an attack on humanity. We're made in the image of God. So it makes sense to me that the devil is in overtime, wanting to mutilate the genitals of children, aborting millions of babies, and just destroying what God has created. And I think right now, what you said is just, it's spot on, because the media plays on the fact that you're afraid to say anything, because you're going to get canceled. No one's going to believe you. You're going to lose everything that you possibly have, which, you know what? Fine at this point, because the future of this country, the future of humanity, and what is true and what is righteous means more than being afraid of those in the shadows that are trying to tell us that if you say anything, you're going to lose it all. Because when we see history, when that is allowed, that is when things begin to spiral and get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So I commend you. I think you're brave. I think you're powerful. I think you're strong. I think a lot of women and men are going to look up to you for a long time to come, because I think we're in this part of the timeline in American history where people are going to look back if it does get documented and not erased by, you know, big tech and these psychopaths, people are going to look back at people like you as to figures that really stood against some serious dark forces trying to dismantle American culture and tradition here in the United States of America. And I don't say that lightly, because sometimes I see people that grift, and I could tell they're grifting. They just want to get in and do their own thing. But I really do see that. And I think you as a female figure right now in this timeline was essential for what's taking place. So I commend you for that. And I know the audience does too.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And I feel the same way towards you, knowing that you've been speaking up about a lot of different issues despite the backlash you face. And obviously you found your place here.
Yeah.
Like, you're in good company of people who all want to do the right thing here and speak up for what's right. But it's challenging. I'm sure you get a lot of hate too. And I was actually thinking, like, you talking about, you know, like evil forces or satanic forces in this, like, whether somebody believes in that or not, there are people who do and who act to like align with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I also think there are people with really good intentions who are doing bad things and not even realizing it. And
Deceived and ignorant.
Maybe deceived, may just not have the perspective. And I have a lot of hope that people in that position can wake up and realize that that's not the right route.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think we're doomed by any means. But I don't think it's going to be a sprint. I think it's going to be a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have a really good team.
I totally agree. I want to ask you this last question. I think what Elon is doing is, I mean, I hold him accountable. I have my eye on him. My show knows this. I don't just like jump immediately to someone because they said one thing that I agree with. I'm like, oh, let's just worship them and embrace them.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. That's
Do you
not...
mean with like more free speech?
Yes,
on
I think his approach of what he's been doing is a solution for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
He just scorched earth, get in there, get rid of everybody that doesn't have American values and get people in that do, so we can have a place where people could all speak.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think Disney should do that. I think corporations that are going full woke should do that, just to get to a place where it's balanced, fair, pro-America, fine, right?
Yeah.
In terms of sports, I think that needs to happen too. I think it needs to happen where all of this stuff that's destroying the love of the game, the love of watching the game, the love of being a part of the game, whatever that game may be, right? All that stuff needs to be removed. It has to be removed because everything is dying. Mm-hmm. Everything is deteriorating. I don't know if you agree with that. Like, what do you think is a solution to fix this stuff in the sphere of, I guess, just skateboarding, if you want to just say that, or female sports in general? Well,
first I want to touch on what you're saying about like free speech. Like Tim says, free speech works. Yeah. Even if it's someone you don't agree with, if they have a terrible opinion, you let them say it.
Let them say it.
At least everyone will know. Mm-hmm. Like, you've seen what happened over the past couple of weeks
Yay,
in the media
Alex Jones.
with yeah,
perfect example.
Like, you let him talk, and he really clarifies how he feels.
Yep.
And before, we were all kind of speculating, and I mean, certain people, I'd seen things as a Jew that I recognized as red flags. Mm-hmm. But now, if you let him just say what he has to say, he will make it clear. Yep. And even...
and make your own decision from there.
Athletes, I think that we should hear what athletes on the other side of this have to say. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, well, the interviews that I've seen make them look worse.
Yep.
Like, it shows that there's not an argument on that side. Mm-hmm. As for a solution for skateboarding, for other sports, I think that, especially in things like skateboarding that aren't like Title IX sports, things that are more independently organized, that have sponsors or like some sort of governing body, the people who make these decisions, who organize these events, need to take responsibility and hear out athletes like myself, and people on the other side too, mm-hmm. but understand that this is about fairness and create better guidelines to go by. Because athletes shouldn't have to advocate for ourselves here. I'm doing it because I knew somebody had to. Mm-hmm. But especially when I see like this happening to teenage girls and kids, they should never have to advocate for themselves like this. Mm-hmm. And it's very disappointing seeing the lack of parents of these girls speaking up. they do so in private. Some of them message me behind the scenes that they were told to basically shut up. But there's a lot of parents who should just say how they feel, because it will help a lot of people. I know there was one father of an Olympian, a female Olympian, who spoke up and has spoken up a little bit, but his daughter is actually woke. So he's speaking up, saying she doesn't understand that this is going to have really serious consequences, and she wants to be nice and inclusive, but she can't wrap her head around why it's problematic.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The damage your influence will do to millions of young girls that look up to you.
So even parents whose kids are like, I don't want you to be involved in this, I want to be nice to my friends, think about the bigger picture here. Use your voice. The more people who speak up about this, the quicker it's going to get fixed. Even like skateboarders, pro skateboarders, there's so many men who are prominent figures in skateboarding who reach out to me, and I just tell them, you know, if you and a few other people all just spoke up at the same time, this be fixed overnight.
I think that's about as simple as it literally gets right there, right?
Yeah.
Taylor, thank you so much for joining me today. I know the audience loves you because you're a brave woman, you're strong, independent, and you spoke up against a woke mob that obviously hates everything we just said, but it needs to be said. It needs to be done because, like I said, I always have in the back of my mind, like, especially being here at TPUSA, student organization, millions of young people that are coming from behind us that are going to have to deal with some serious stuff in the future if we don't say anything. And
who aren't going to have the baseline of normal that we know and grew up with.
Exactly.
This will be their only experience.
Absolutely. Taylor, where can people follow you, Twitter, social media, and track with your story as it continues and unfolds and see any work that you have coming up?
You can find me on Twitter at TMSilverman, and on Instagram, where I made my original post that went viral, at Taylor May Silverman, May with a Y, like the month. And yeah, you can, search my name on YouTube or Google to find stories and find all the terrible articles about me where journalists try to smear campaign me.
That's always fun. Make
kidding,
sure to follow her right now, you guys. And also, if you're watching on Rumble, obviously you are if you're watching this, the end of this show, make sure to follow us, sub to the channel, smash that like button, and also share this anywhere you can. Write a comment below. We love to see you guys' comments, but make sure to share this everywhere you possibly can. My name is Drew Hernandez. These are the Front Lines, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for having me, Drew.